A fat teen took a beating to save a Hell's Angel. But what happened next broke everyone. He was just a quiet kid, bullied, lonely, walking home the same way every day. But one moment of courage changed his whole life. When he threw himself in front of 3 armed men to save a biker everyone feared, he became the town's unlikely hero. At first, people cheered him, called him brave, called him pure. But then the truth got twisted. The media turned, the town turned, and the same people who praised him started asking, why would a kid risk his life for a criminal? The biker everyone hated starts showing up at the hospital. He brings gifts, sits by the boy's bed, and swears he'll never forget. But behind that promise lies a past full of darkness, and a secret that could destroy them both. One small-town act of kindness becomes a battle between faith and fear, love and judgment, second chances and scars that never fade. What happens when the world condemns the only friendship that can save them both? And when the truth finally comes out, who will be brave enough to believe? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. Tommy's feet dragged against the cracked sidewalk as he made his way home from Mill Ridge High School. The late August heat pressed down on him like a heavy blanket, making his XXL t-shirt cling uncomfortably to his back. His backpack straps dug into his shoulders, loaded down with textbooks from his first week of sophomore year. Behind him, cruel laughter still rang in his ears. "Hey, stutter boy," they had mocked during lunch break. "Better run home to mommy." The memory made his chest tight, but he kept walking, one foot in front of the other, just like his mom always told him to do. The shortest way home led past the Iron Den, a weathered brick building with neon beer signs flickering in its grimy windows. Tommy usually tried to walk quickly past it, eyes down, but today something made him look up. A group of bikers lounged outside, leather vests decorated with patches, cigarette smoke curling around their heads like angry spirits. One of them stood apart from the rest. He was tall and lean, with arms covered in tattoos and a jagged scar along his jaw. But it was his eyes that caught Tommy's attention. They were cold and hard, like chunks of blue ice. Those eyes locked onto Tommy's for a moment that seemed to stretch forever. Tommy's heart hammered in his chest. He wanted to look away but couldn't. There was something in that gaze, not just meanness, but maybe pain too. Before he could think about it more, one of the other bikers said something that made them all laugh, breaking the connection. Tommy hurried past, his face burning. When he finally reached home, the small white house with peeling paint that he shared with his mom, his shoulders slumped with relief. The screen door creaked as he pushed. It opened. "Tommy, is that you?" His mom's voice called from the kitchen. Marilyn Riker appeared in the doorway, still wearing her blue nurse's scrubs from her early shift at the hospital. Her face, tired but loving, creased with concern as she looked him over. "You're late getting home." "So sorry," Tommy mumbled, dropping his backpack by the door. "I had to stay after to talk to Mr. Peterson about the science project." His mother's eyes narrowed slightly. "Did you walk past the Iron Den again?" Tommy shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "It's the fastest way." Tommy James Riker. His mother's voice took on that stern tone he knew so well. "We've talked about this. That place is dangerous. Those people are dangerous." She moved closer, putting her hands on his shoulders. "Promise me you'll take the long way around from now on." Tommy nodded, though his heart wasn't in it. His mom meant well, she always did. But sometimes her protectiveness felt like another cage, not so different from the ones the bullies built with their taunts and fists. They ate dinner in silence. Meatloaf and instant mashed potatoes, with green beans from a can. The small television in the corner of the kitchen played the local news, its sound turned low. Tommy pushed his food around his plate, his appetite dampened by the day's events. Suddenly, his mother's hand shot out to grab the remote, turning up the volume. On screen, a reporter stood in front of the Iron Den, her perfectly styled hair at odds with the gritty backdrop. "Another violent incident at the notorious local bar," she was saying. "Sources say the fight broke out when members of a local motorcycle club confronted patrons over a disputed pool game. 2 men were treated for minor injuries." The camera panned across the front of the bar, and Tommy caught a glimpse of the same tattooed man he'd seen earlier, standing in the background with his arms crossed, that same cold stare directed at the camera. "See?" his mother said, clicking off the TV. "That's exactly why I don't want you anywhere near that place. Those men are nothing but trouble." She started clearing the plates, her movements sharp with worry. "Your father would never have wanted you mixed up with people like that." Tommy felt the familiar ache that always came with mentions of his dad. He'd died when Tommy was just 5 years old. A heart attack at 38, too young, everyone said. Sometimes Tommy wondered if his dad would have understood him better, would have known how to help him be braver, stronger. Later that night, Tommy stood at his bedroom window, looking out at the quiet street below. The streetlight on the corner flickered, creating moving shadows that reminded him of the motorcycle club members' restless movements. He thought again about those ice-blue eyes, wondering what stories they held behind their hardness. Closing his eyes, Tommy did what he always did when things felt too big to handle. He prayed, his words whispered into the darkness of his room. "Dear God," he murmured, "please help me be stronger tomorrow. Help me find a way to make things different." He paused, then added, "And maybe help those people at the Iron Den, too. Even if Mom says they're bad." The night air carried the distant rumble of motorcycles, like thunder promising a storm. Tommy didn't know it then, but his simple prayer was about to set in motion events that would change not just his life, but the lives of everyone in Millridge. As he climbed into bed, the weight of the day's humiliations still heavy on his shoulders, he couldn't have imagined how tomorrow would begin to answer his prayer, in ways both wonderful and terrifying. The ceiling fan spun lazily above him, pushing around the warm air. Tommy lay there, listening to the familiar sounds of his mother getting ready for bed. Water running in the bathroom, the creak of floorboards, the soft click of her bedroom door. In these quiet moments, he felt both the safety of home and the loneliness of being different, of being the kid who couldn't quite fit in. His last thoughts before sleep took him were of those ice-blue eyes at the Iron Den, and how they seemed to hold secrets as deep as the prayers he whispered into his pillow each night. Tomorrow would be different, he told himself. It had to be. The afternoon sun beat down on Tommy's shoulders as he shuffled out of Millridge High School. His backpack felt heavier than usual, loaded with textbooks and the weight of another difficult day. The final bell's ring still echoed in his ears, mixing with the familiar sound of teenage chatter and slamming lockers. He paused at the school gates, scanning the crowd. No sign of Jake Thompson or his gang, the usual tormentors who made his walks home a living nightmare. Maybe, just maybe, he could make it home without incident today. Tommy took a deep breath and headed toward the shortcut. He knew he was breaking his promise to his mother, but the thought of taking the long way, an extra 30 minutes in this heat, made his chest tight. Sweat already dampened his shirt, making it cling uncomfortably to his back. The streets grew quieter as he approached the industrial district. Abandoned warehouses loomed on either side, their broken windows staring down like empty eyes. The Iron Den came into view, its neon sign unlit in the daylight, looking somehow more menacing than it had the day before. That's when he heard it. The sound of flesh hitting flesh, followed by angry voices from behind the bar. Tommy's steps faltered. He should keep walking. He should pretend he hadn't heard anything. But something made him pause. "You can't hide forever, Carson," a rough voice carried around the corner. "Those debts ain't going away." Tommy's heart hammered in his chest as he crept closer to the edge of the building. Peering around the corner, he saw them. 3 men, all wearing leather vests with patches he didn't recognize, surrounding the biker he'd seen yesterday. Blade Carson stood with his back against the wall, his ice-blue eyes darting between his attackers. "I told you." Blade's voice was low, controlled. "I'm done with that life. Find someone else to do your dirty work." One of the men, a giant with a shaved head, stepped forward. "Wrong answer." His fist connected with Blade's jaw, snapping his head back against the brick wall. Tommy watched in horror as the other 2 men moved in. This wasn't a fight. It was an execution. Without thinking, without considering the consequences, Tommy did something that would change everything. He ran forward, his voice cracking as he shouted, "Stop! Leave him alone!" Time seemed to slow down as 4 heads turned toward him. Tommy saw surprise flash across Blade's face, quickly replaced by alarm. The 3 attackers exchanged glances, then cruel smiles spread across their faces. "Well, well," the bald man sneered. "Look what we got here. A little hero." Tommy's courage wavered as they advanced toward him. His legs felt like lead, but he stood his ground. I said leave him alone." His stutter made the words less commanding than he'd hoped. The first punch caught him in the stomach, driving the air from his lungs. Tommy doubled over, gasping. The second blow sent him sprawling onto the cracked pavement. Pain exploded in his side as a boot connected with his ribs. Through tears of pain, Tommy saw one of the men reach into his jacket. Metal glinted in the afternoon sun, a knife blade, catching the light like a cruel promise. "No!" Blade's voice thundered across the alley. Tommy heard the sound of running feet, then a metallic clang. Through blurry vision, he saw Blade wielding what looked like a tire iron, swinging it in wide arcs that kept the attackers at bay. "Back off!" Blade roared. "The kid's got nothing to do with this!" The fight that followed was a blur of violence and motion. Blade moved with the precision of someone who'd spent a lifetime in similar situations. The tire iron connected with flesh and bone, drawing pained grunts and curses from his attackers. In the distance, police sirens began to wail. The sound seemed to break some spell, and the 3 men backed away, the bald one clutching his bloodied arm. "This ain't over, Carson," he spat, before they all turned and ran, disappearing around the corner of the building. Tommy lay on the ground, tasting blood in his mouth. Everything hurt. He tried to move but couldn't seem to make his body respond properly. Through darkening vision, he saw Blade kneel beside him, pressing something soft against his face. "Stay with me, kid." Blade's voice was different now, softer, almost pleading. "Please, just stay with me." Red and blue lights painted the walls as police cars screeched to a halt at the entrance to the alley. Tommy heard shouting, running feet, radio static. Through it all, Blade stayed beside him, one hand pressing the rag to Tommy's wounds, the other gripping Tommy's hand tightly. The paramedics arrived in what seemed like seconds and hours at the same time. They worked quickly, asking questions Tommy couldn't quite focus enough to answer. As they lifted him onto the stretcher, he felt Blade's hand slip away. "I'm riding with him." Blade's voice brooked no argument. Tommy heard someone try to object, but Blade must have won because seconds later he was back, his calloused hand once again gripping Tommy's. The ambulance doors slammed shut, and they were moving. Through the fog of pain and the growing darkness at the edges of his vision, Tommy felt the steady pressure of Blade's hand. The sirens wailed overhead as they raced through the streets of Millridge. But inside the ambulance, Blade's voice was a quiet anchor. "You're gonna be okay, kid," he kept saying, his grip never wavering. "I've got you. You're gonna be okay." Tommy wanted to respond, to thank him, to ask why he was being so kind, but the darkness was getting thicker now. The last thing he was aware of was Blade's hand, still holding his, as consciousness finally slipped away. The steady beeping of hospital monitors pulled Tommy from the depths of unconsciousness. His eyelids felt heavy, like they were weighed down with sand. The sharp smell of antiseptic filled his nostrils, and somewhere nearby, he heard quiet sobbing. Slowly, painfully, Tommy opened his eyes. Harsh fluorescent light made him squint. As his vision cleared, he saw his mother, Marilyn, slumped in a chair beside his bed. Her shoulders shook with quiet sobs, her normally neat nurse's uniform wrinkled from what must have been hours of sitting vigil. "Mom?" His voice came out as a dry whisper. Marilyn's head snapped up. Her face was streaked with tears, her makeup long since cried away. "Tommy!" She lunged forward, carefully wrapping her arms around him. "Oh, thank God you're awake." Tommy tried to return the hug, but found his body wouldn't cooperate. Everything hurt. His ribs screamed in protest at the slight movement, and his face felt swollen and tender. How long?" he managed to ask. 2 days, Marilyn answered, wiping her eyes. "You've been out for 2 days. The doctor said you had a concussion, 3 broken ribs, and..." Her voice broke. "What were you thinking, Tommy? You could have been killed." Before Tommy could respond, a nurse appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Riker, there are some reporters outside again. They're asking for statements." Marilyn's face hardened. "Tell them what I told the others. No comment." The nurse nodded sympathetically. "I've tried, but the story's already everywhere. Social media, local news. They're calling him the boy who saved the biker." She held up her phone, showing a news website with Tommy's school picture prominently displayed. The headline read, "Fat Teen Saves Outlaw Biker in Heroic Act." Tommy felt his cheeks burn at the description. Even when he did something brave, they had to mention his weight. Throughout the morning, a steady stream of visitors arrived. Teachers from school, members of their church, even people Tommy barely knew came bearing flowers, cards, and well wishes. His small hospital room began to look like a florist's shop, with bouquets covering every surface. Around noon, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Blade Carson stood awkwardly, his imposing frame seeming almost diminished in the sterile hospital setting. His worn leather jacket was out of place among the medical equipment, and in his hands he clutched a small brown teddy bear. The moment Marilyn saw him, she shot to her feet. "How dare you show your face here?" Blade took a step into the room, his eyes fixed on Tommy. "I just wanted to check on the kid." "Check on him?" Marilyn's voice trembled with fury. "He's in here because of you, because you and your criminal friends couldn't handle your own problems." "Mom," Tommy tried to interrupt, but she wasn't listening. "Those weren't my friends," Blade said quietly. "I didn't want any of this to happen." "You're nothing but a thug," Marilyn spat. "A criminal who should be in jail. My son is lying here because he was foolish enough to try to help someone like you." Blade's face remained impassive, but Tommy saw something flicker in his eyes. Pain, maybe, or resignation. Without another word, he set the small teddy bear on a nearby table and turned to leave. "Get out," Marilyn called after him, "and don't come back." Tommy watched helplessly as Blade's broad shoulders disappeared through the doorway, but instead of leaving completely, he stopped just outside in the hallway. Through the partially open door, Tommy could hear him speaking quietly to someone. "Ma'am." Blade's voice was low, meant only for the nurse he'd stopped. "About the boy's medical bills?" There was a rustling sound, and Tommy caught a glimpse of Blade pressing something into the nurse's hands, a thick wad of cash wrapped in a rubber band. "Make sure it's taken care of," Blade continued, "but keep my name out of it." The nurse's voice was surprised but kind. "Of course, Mr. Carson. I'll see to it personally." Then Blade was gone, his heavy boots echoing down the hospital corridor. The afternoon passed slowly. Marilyn fussed over Tommy's pillows, adjusted his blankets, and supervised his dinner with the intensity only a nurse mother could muster. But there was tension in the air, questions that needed asking. Finally, as evening settled over the hospital and the stream of visitors had dwindled to nothing, Tommy found his courage. "Mom?" he asked, watching her arrange yet another bouquet of flowers. "Why do you hate him so much?" Marilyn's hands stilled on the flowers. "Who?" "Blade. Mr. Carson. You don't even know him." His mother turned to face him, her expression tired and sad. "I know his type, Tommy. I've seen too many of them come through the emergency room. The fighters, the drinkers, the ones who think they can solve everything with their fists. People like him don't change." Tommy thought about the teddy bear sitting on the table, about the quiet way Blade had tried to help with the medical bills without taking any credit. He remembered the feeling of Blade's hand holding his in the ambulance, the desperate way he'd pleaded for Tommy to stay with him. The monitors continued their steady beeping in the darkness. Tommy looked out the window at the city lights twinkling beyond. "I think he already did," he whispered. His mother didn't respond, but in the dim light, Tommy saw her glance at the small brown teddy bear. She reached out and touched it briefly, her fingers lingering on its soft fur, before turning away to adjust his blankets one more time. Outside his window, camera flashes occasionally lit up the night as reporters lingered, hoping for one more quote, one more angle on the story that had captured the town's imagination. But inside room 212, Tommy lay quiet, thinking about unlikely heroes and the strange ways that fate sometimes worked. The teddy bear watched from its perch on the table, its glass eyes reflecting the soft glow of the medical monitors, as if keeping its own silent vigil through the night. The morning sun streamed through the hospital windows as Tommy packed his few belongings into a small duffel bag. After 7 days of constant monitoring, prodding, and endless visits from well-wishers, he was finally going home. "Don't forget your cards," Marilyn reminded him, gathering the dozens of get-well wishes that had flooded his room. The collection included everything from crayon drawings by elementary school kids to an official letter from the mayor's office. Tommy picked up the small brown teddy bear, the one Blade had brought, and tucked it carefully into his bag. His mother pressed her lips together but said nothing. The discharge process seemed to take forever. Nurses kept stopping by to wish him well, taking selfies and calling him their little hero. Tommy forced smiles through it all, but the attention made his stutter worse. When a group of orderlies asked for a photo, he could barely get out a "thank you." Finally, they made their way to the hospital entrance. A small crowd had gathered, some holding phones, others with handmade signs reading, "Welcome home, Tommy," and "Our hero." "I didn't know there'd be so many people," Tommy whispered, shrinking closer to his mother. But what really caught his attention was the gleaming Harley-Davidson parked near the curb. Its chrome surfaces sparkled in the morning light, freshly polished to mirror brightness. And there, leaning against it with his arms crossed, stood Blade Carson. The biker had cleaned up. His leather jacket was new, or at least newly cleaned. His usual stubble had been trimmed into a neat goatee. But his eyes, they were the same. Deep, watchful, carrying that mixture of hardness and hidden pain that Tommy had noticed that very first day. "Hey, kid," Blade said softly as they approached. He straightened up, and Tommy could see how the crowd drew back slightly, creating a bubble of space around the intimidating figure. Marilyn's hand tightened on Tommy's shoulder. "We need to get going." But Blade took a step forward, his voice low and serious. "Just give me 1 minute. Please." Tommy looked up at his mother, silently pleading. After a long moment, she gave a tight nod. "You saved my life back there," Blade said, looking directly at Tommy. "Not just from those punks, but something bigger. You showed me something I'd forgotten existed." He cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with speaking so openly. "Look, I know your mom's got every right to keep me away, but I want you to know, you ever need a brother, you got one. No questions asked." Tommy felt tears pricking at his eyes. No one had ever spoken to him like this before, like he mattered, like he was strong. "That's enough," Marilyn cut in, her voice sharp. She pulled Tommy toward their car. "We appreciate what you're trying to do, Mr. Carson, but my son needs to rest." Blade didn't argue or try to follow. He just nodded, watching as they walked away. Through the car window, Tommy saw him mount his motorcycle, the engine roaring to life with a sound like distant thunder. The next few days were a blur of attention Tommy had never experienced before. People waved from their cars when he passed. Store owners offered him free sodas and snacks. Kids who had never given him a second glance now wanted to sit with him at lunch. But something felt off about it all. The same classmates who had mocked his weight and stutter now acted like they'd always been his friends. They took selfies with him and posted them online with hashtags like #WatchMyHero and Tommy the Great, but their smiles didn't reach their eyes. "Hey, Tommy," called Jason Peters, who just 2 weeks ago had tripped him in the cafeteria. "Want to sit with us? We're going viral on TikTok." Tommy mumbled an excuse and ate his lunch alone in the library instead. That evening, his mother called him into the living room. The local news was on, and Tommy's stomach dropped when he saw Blade's picture on the screen. "Breaking news tonight," the anchor announced, as questions arise about the feel-good story that captured our town's hearts. Sources claim that Blade Carson, the biker saved by young Tommy Riker, was seen near another violent altercation at the Roadhouse bar last night. While no charges have been filed, witnesses suggest Carson may have connections to ongoing criminal activity in the area. The report cut to an expert, a former police officer who spoke gravely about how criminal elements often manipulated young people for sympathy. "It's a classic tactic," the man explained. "Find a vulnerable kid, make them feel special, use them as cover for illegal activities." Tommy felt sick. "That's not true," he protested. "He's not like that." But Marilyn had already made up her mind. The next morning, she made a call to the police station, formally requesting that Blade Carson stay away from their family. "It's for your own good," she told Tommy as she hung up the phone. "I won't let him use you as some kind of shield for his criminal activities." Tommy ran to his bedroom window, drawn by the familiar rumble of a motorcycle engine. Outside, Blade sat astride his Harley, looking up at the house. Their eyes met briefly across the distance. Then, without a wave or a gesture, Blade kicked his bike into gear and rode away down the empty morning street. The sound of his engine echoed long after he'd disappeared, like a promise carried on the wind. Tommy pressed his hand against the cool glass, watching until the last trace of exhaust had faded from the air. The teddy bear sat on his dresser, its glass eyes reflecting the rising sun, silent witness to promises made and broken, to heroes created and destroyed by the fickle attention of a small town's imagination. The crutches dug into Tommy's armpits as he hobbled down the school hallway. 2 weeks had passed since the incident at the Iron Den, but the bruises on his ribs still ached when he breathed too deeply. He kept his eyes fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor, trying to ignore the whispers and snickers that followed him. "Hey, biker boy," someone called out. "Where's your leather jacket? Bet he can't even start a motorcycle with that limp." Tommy's face burned. The fame that had briefly made him a local hero had twisted into something cruel. His old tormentors had found new ammunition, and they used it relentlessly. At his locker, someone had drawn a wobbly motorcycle in permanent marker with the words, "Hell's Angels Wannabe," scrawled beneath it. Tommy's hands shook as he worked the combination lock, pretending not to notice the fresh graffiti. The walk home took twice as long with crutches. Every step reminded him of that afternoon behind the Iron Den. The crack of fists, the flash of steel, the warmth of Blade's rough hand holding his in the ambulance. Sometimes, late at night, he could still hear the rumble of that motorcycle engine, like a distant thunder promising rain that never fell. Each morning, his mother hovered over him at breakfast, her worry lines deeper than ever. She'd taken to praying out loud while she stirred her coffee, her words pointed and clear. "Dear Lord," she'd say, her eyes flicking toward Tommy, "please help my son forget the evil influences that have touched his life. Guide him back to the right path." Tommy would push his cereal around the bowl, the milk going warm and gray, while his mother's prayers washed over him like lukewarm water. After school that Wednesday, Tommy checked the mailbox like he always did. Among the bills and advertisements, he found a folded piece of paper. His name was written on it in careful block letters. Inside, the message was simple. "At Vet's Garage. Come if you need help." He recognized the handwriting from the Get Well card that had come with the teddy bear at the hospital. His heart thumped against his ribs like a trapped bird. That night, sleep eluded him. He lay in bed, staring at his ceiling, the note burning a hole in his desk drawer. His mother's warnings echoed in his head, mixed with the memory of Blade's voice. "You ever need a brother, you got one." The next day after school, Tommy made his decision. He told his mother he was going to the library to study. Instead, he carefully propped his crutches against his bike. It wasn't comfortable, but it was faster than walking. The late autumn air bit at his cheeks as he pedaled slowly across town. Vet's Garage sat on the outskirts, a weathered building with an American flag hanging limp in the still air. The parking lot was half full of cars in various states of repair. A hand-painted sign read, "Veterans Helping Veterans," beneath the official business name. Tommy's stomach churned as he locked his bike to a fence post. What if his mother was right? What if this was all some kind of trap? The main door was open, spilling yellow light and the smell of motor oil onto the cracked concrete. Tommy limped inside, his crutches clicking against the floor. The garage was surprisingly clean and organized. Tools hung in neat rows on pegboards. In one corner, a coffee pot burbled next to a cluster of mismatched chairs. A radio played classic rock softly in the background. Several men worked on vehicles, their movements deliberate and focused. One had a prosthetic leg. Another bore burn scars that covered half his face. They glanced up as Tommy entered, but their eyes held no judgment, only quiet acknowledgement. And there, in the far bay, was Blade. He was sanding an old fender, his movements smooth and rhythmic. The afternoon light caught the silver in his hair. He looked different here, calmer, more centered. His leather jacket hung on a hook nearby, replaced by a clean work shirt with Carson stitched above the pocket. Blade looked up as Tommy approached. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of sandpaper on metal filled the silence. "You got my note," Blade finally said, his voice gruff but gentle. Tommy nodded, suddenly unsure what to say. Blade set down his tools and wiped his hands on a rag. "How are the ribs?" "Better," Tommy managed. "Still sore sometimes." "Yeah, that kind of hurt takes time to heal." Something in Blade's tone suggested he wasn't just talking about physical injuries. He gestured to a workbench nearby. "Take a load off. Those crutches look uncomfortable as hell." Tommy settled onto the bench, grateful to rest his arms. He watched as Blade resumed sanding, his movements precise and patient. "This place," Tommy said after a while. "It's not what I expected." Blade's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Most things aren't, once you look closer." He ran a hand over the fender's surface. "Everyone here's got something they're trying to fix. Some of it's cars, some of it's—" He tapped his chest. "In here." He reached into a drawer and pulled out something small, a mechanic's glove, child-sized but well-made. "Here," he said, holding it out to Tommy. "Everyone's got to fix something. Might as well start with what's broken inside." Tommy took the glove, running his fingers over the supple leather. It was worn but solid, like it had stories to tell. "My brother wore that when he first started working on cars," Blade said quietly. "Before he shipped out to Iraq. Never came home to claim it." The weight of those words settled over them both. Tommy slipped the glove onto his right hand. It fit perfectly. "Some people," Blade continued, his voice rough, "they see a broken thing and think it's worthless. But sometimes the broken parts—" He gestured around the garage, at the men working steadily on their projects, at the vehicles slowly coming back to life. "Sometimes they're the strongest, once they heal right." Tommy looked down at the glove on his hand, then back at Blade. In that moment, he understood something his mother's prayers hadn't been able to teach him. That redemption wasn't about forgetting the past, but about building something new from its pieces. "Think you could show me how to sand?" Tommy asked, his stutter barely noticeable. Blade's face softened. "Yeah, kid, I can do that." For the next hour, they worked side by side in comfortable silence, the sound of their sandpaper joining the quiet symphony of the garage. Tools clinking, engines turning over, veterans murmuring to each other as they rebuilt their lives, one broken piece at a time. The afternoon sun slanted through the garage's dusty windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Tommy had started coming every day after school, his backpack stuffed with homework he'd complete between lessons in auto mechanics. The veterans had grown used to his presence, offering friendly nods as he made his way to Blade's workstation. "Hand me that 3/8 wrench," Blade called from under an old Ford pickup. Tommy knew which one he meant now. 2 weeks of daily visits had taught him the basics of a mechanic's toolkit. "Here," Tommy said, placing it in Blade's outstretched hand. His stutter had almost disappeared around the garage. Something about the steady rhythm of work and the accepting atmosphere made words flow easier. Blade slid out from under the truck, wiping grease from his hands. "You're learning fast, kid. Ready to tackle that dirt bike today?" In the corner sat their project, a beaten-up Honda that Blade had pulled from the salvage yard. Its red paint was faded to pink, and rust ate at the chrome, but Tommy saw potential in its broken lines. "It looks pretty rough," Tommy admitted, running his hand along the dented gas tank. Blade chuckled. "Sometimes the roughest-looking things just need someone to believe in them." He paused, his expression growing distant. "Like my brother used to say before he shipped out to Iraq, everything deserves a second chance." Tommy looked up, sensing a story coming. Blade didn't talk much about his past, but when he did, Tommy listened carefully. "Jake was the good one," Blade continued, pulling parts from a cardboard box. "Straight A's, joined the Marines right after high school. Me? I was already running with the wrong crowd, but he never gave up on me. his hands stilled on a spark plug. When we got the news about the IED, I just couldn't handle it. The angels were there, offering brotherhood when I felt most alone. They worked in silence for a while, dismantling the bike piece by piece. Tommy noticed how Blade's hands shook slightly when he mentioned the angels, but they steadied as he focused on the task at hand. Days turned into weeks. Tommy learned to change oil, his hands growing confident under Blade's patient guidance. The veterans shared stories between repairs, tales of courage, loss, and redemption that made Tommy's school troubles seem smaller somehow. One afternoon, while they were patching a tire, Tommy noticed Blade studying him. "What?" "You're reading that manual upside down," Blade said carefully. Tommy felt his face flush. "The letters, they sometimes get mixed up in my head." "Dyslexia?" Blade asked, not unkindly. When Tommy nodded, Blade pulled out an old repair manual. "My brother had it too. Here's how he learned to work around it." For the next hour, Blade showed Tommy tricks for decoding technical text, ways to break down complicated words, methods for remembering sequences. For the first time, Tommy felt truly seen, not judged for what he couldn't do, but supported in finding ways to succeed. The dirt bike was coming along nicely, its frame now clean and prepped for paint, when Marilyn discovered where Tommy had been spending his afternoons. She burst into the garage one Thursday, her nurse's scrubs still on from her shift. "Thomas James Riker," her voice echoed off the metal walls. The veterans looked up from their work, then tactfully found reasons to step outside. Blade straightened from where he'd been showing Tommy how to adjust the chain tension. "Mrs. Riker," he said quietly, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "How dare you?" Marilyn's voice shook. "After I specifically told you to stay away from my son?" "Mom," Tommy started, but she cut him off. "Get your things. We're leaving." Her eyes never left Blade. "Stay away from my son. He doesn't need whatever this is." Blade met her gaze steadily. "Ma'am, I ain't taking him anywhere. He's finding himself." His voice was calm, respectful. "Look at what he's built." He gestured to the half-restored bike. But Marilyn was already pulling Tommy toward the door. He resisted for the first time in his life, planting his feet. "Mom, stop." That night at dinner, the tension was thick enough to cut. Marilyn pushed her food around her plate, occasionally muttering prayers under her breath. "You keep telling me about God," Tommy finally said, his voice quiet but firm. "But maybe God sent him." Marilyn's fork clattered against her plate. "That man is dangerous, Tommy. He's been in prison. He's been in gang fights." "He's changed," Tommy insisted. "You should see him at the garage. He helps veterans rebuild their lives. He's teaching me things nobody else ever has." "He's manipulating you." "No," Tommy said, standing up from the table. "He's the first person who's ever really seen me. Did you know I have dyslexia? He figured it out today. He's teaching me how to work around it." Marilyn's face softened slightly. "Tommy, the bike we're rebuilding? It's like me. Everybody else saw it as worthless junk, but Blade saw what it could be." Tommy's voice grew stronger. "That's what God does too, right? Sees the good in broken things?" The next day, despite his mother's protests, Tommy returned to the garage. Blade was waiting with an old biker manual spread out on the workbench. "Your mom's right to worry," he said as Tommy sat down. "But I promise you this, everything I teach you here is about building up, not tearing down." Together they bent over the manual, Blade patiently helping Tommy decode the technical language. Outside, the sun painted the sky in shades of hope. And inside, a boy who had always felt broken began to see himself as something worth rebuilding. The October wind rustled through the changing leaves as Tommy walked down the school hallway, his steps lighter than they'd been in years. The past few months had transformed him in ways that went beyond the physical, though the hours spent working on engines and bikes had definitely strengthened his arms and straightened his posture. Mrs. Henderson, the music teacher, waved him into the practice room where the music club met every Tuesday and Thursday. "Tommy, right on time for your practice session." Inside, other students were already setting up their instruments. No one teased him anymore, not since he'd started showing up with quiet confidence and a determination that commanded respect. "Hey, Tommy," called Sarah from behind her keyboard. "Want to run through the piece again?" He nodded, pulling out the worn guitar he'd been borrowing from the school. His fingers found the familiar chords, though the instrument never felt quite right in his hands. It wasn't like his dad's old guitar, the one that had sat in their attic gathering dust since the accident 5 years ago. Meanwhile, across town at the vet's garage, Blade Carson was hunched over a workbench, but he wasn't working on any engines. Before him lay a beautifully crafted Gibson acoustic guitar, its wood dulled by years of neglect. He'd discovered it in the Rikers' attic 2 weeks ago, when Marilyn had reluctantly allowed him to help fix their leaking roof. "This was Jim's," she'd said softly, touching the dusty case. "Tommy's father. He used to play every night." Blade worked carefully, his calloused fingers gentle as they replaced worn strings and polished the aged wood. The other veterans watched with knowing smiles. They'd seen how the tough ex-biker had softened around Tommy, becoming more like a protective older brother than the hardened outlaw he'd once been. "Kids' talent show is next week, right?" asked Mike, an older veteran who specialized in transmission work. "Yeah," Blade replied, adjusting the bridge with precision. "He doesn't know about this yet. His mom helped me get it out without him knowing." The fact that Marilyn had agreed to anything involving Blade showed how much things had changed. She'd seen the positive changes in her son, his growing confidence, improved grades, and the way he carried himself with newfound purpose. Though she still kept her distance, the sharp edge of hostility had dulled to cautious acceptance. The days leading up to the talent show buzzed with nervous energy. Tommy practiced relentlessly, determined to perfect "Stand By Me," the song his father used to sing to his mother on their anniversary. He'd found an old recording in a box of memories and had been secretly learning it for months. The evening of the show arrived with a crisp autumn chill. The school auditorium filled with parents, teachers, and students. Backstage, Tommy paced, his borrowed guitar feeling particularly awkward in his sweaty hands. A soft knock on the backstage door made him turn. There stood Blade, looking almost unrecognizable in clean jeans and a plain denim jacket. No leather, no chains, nothing that marked him as the former outlaw he'd once been. "Got something for you, kid?" he said quietly, holding out a familiar case. Tommy's hands trembled as he opened it. "Dad's guitar?" he whispered, running his fingers over the restored wood. "How did you—" "Your mom helped," Blade said simply. "She thought it was time." Tears welled in Tommy's eyes as he carefully lifted the instrument. It felt right in his hands, like coming home. "Thank you," he managed. "You've got this, kid," Blade said, squeezing his shoulder. "I'll be in the back. Just look for me if you need to." As Blade made his way to his seat, he noticed Marilyn sitting near the front, her nurse's uniform suggesting she'd come straight from her shift. She gave him a small, hesitant nod, the most acknowledgement she'd ever offered publicly. The show began. Act after act passed. Dancers, singers, a surprisingly good juggler. Then came Tommy's turn. He walked onto the stage, no longer the scared, bullied kid from months ago. His father's guitar gleamed under the stage lights as he settled onto the stool. His eyes found Blade in the back row, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. Tommy took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes of "Stand By Me" filled the auditorium, and when he started singing, his usual stutter disappeared completely. In the front row, Marilyn's hand flew to her mouth. She hadn't heard this song since Jim had last sung it to her, just days before the accident. Tears streamed down her face as she watched her son, so much like his father in that moment, pour his heart into every word. Tommy's voice grew stronger with each verse. He wasn't just performing anymore. He was telling his family's story, weaving together past and present, loss and hope. The audience sat transfixed, many wiping away tears of their own. As the last note faded, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then the auditorium erupted in thunderous applause. Students leaped to their feet, cheering. Teachers dabbed at their eyes. Marilyn stood, clapping through her tears, her face glowing with pride. After the show, the audience spilled out into the cool night air. Marilyn made her way through the crowd to where Blade stood quietly off to the side. "Thank you," she said softly, surprising them both. "For fixing the guitar, for everything. He's different now." "He always had it in him," Blade replied. "Just needed someone to see it." Tommy burst out of the building, still buzzing with adrenaline. He ran to them both, the guitar case clutched in his hands. Without hesitation, Blade pulled him into a bear hug, pride evident in his usually stern face. Neither of them noticed the flash of a camera in the darkness or the figure slipping away into the shadows. In that moment, they were simply celebrating a triumph, unaware that the captured image would soon cast a shadow over everything they'd built. The autumn wind picked up, sending leaves dancing around their feet as they stood together under the stars, an unlikely family formed in the space between broken things and second chances. The morning after the talent show dawned cold and gray. Tommy was still riding high from his performance when his mother's phone rang during breakfast. Her face darkened as she scrolled through something on her screen. "Oh no," she whispered. There it was, the photo from last night, splashed across social media. The image showed Blade hugging Tommy outside the school, but the angle made it look sinister, like a predator cornering prey. The headline screamed, "Teen hero back with outlaw mentor, parents concerned." Tommy's heart sank as he read the comments below. People who didn't know them, who had never met Blade, were saying terrible things. They called him a criminal, a corrupting influence, a danger to children. "It's not fair," Tommy said, his voice cracking. "They don't know him like we do." Before Marilyn could respond, the phone rang again. This time it was the school principal, her voice sharp with concern. "Mrs. Riker, we need to discuss your son's situation. This relationship with Mr. Carson is inappropriate. The school board is very concerned about the influence of a known criminal on our students." "But he's changed." Marilyn found herself defending Blade, surprising even herself. "He works with veterans now." "Nevertheless, we're considering disciplinary action. This kind of association reflects poorly on our school." Across town at the vet's garage, Blade arrived early to open up, only to stop dead in his tracks. Fresh red spray paint covered the garage door. "Traitor, snitch, dead man soon." His hands shook as he took a photo with his phone. He knew exactly who was behind this. The Devil's Hammer Gang, his old rivals from his outlaw days. They'd never forgiven him for going straight, for choosing a different path. Inside, the other veterans noticed his tension. Mike, a former Marine with a prosthetic leg, put a hand on his shoulder. "We've got your back, brother," he said quietly. "Always." They worked through the morning, trying to ignore the threat hanging over them. Blade kept checking his phone, wanting to warn Tommy to stay away, but not wanting to drag him further into this mess. As evening approached, the autumn sky turned an angry orange. Blade was closing up when he smelled it first, gasoline and burning rubber. Then came the crash of breaking glass, followed by whooping engine sounds. "Fire!" someone shouted from inside. Blade ran toward the building, his heart pounding. Through the smoke, he could see flames already climbing the walls. He knew Mike and Joe were still inside, working late on a transmission job. Without hesitation, he kicked through the side door. The heat hit him like a wall, but he pressed forward, pulling his shirt over his nose. He found Mike first, struggling with his prosthetic leg caught under a fallen shelf. "I've got you, brother," Blade grunted, lifting the shelf and helping Mike to his feet. They stumbled toward the exit together. After getting Mike to safety, Blade plunged back in. Joe was unconscious near the back office, overcome by smoke. Blade hoisted him over his shoulder, every step a battle against the growing inferno. They barely made it out before the roof started to cave in. As they gasped for air on the pavement, sirens wailed in the distance. Tommy arrived on his bike, pedaling frantically after seeing the smoke from his bedroom window. He skidded to a stop, watching in horror as flames devoured the place that had become his sanctuary. "Blade!" he called out, running forward, but strong hands held him back, firefighters arriving on scene. The next hours passed in a blur of flashing lights and questions. Police interviewed everyone, but their focus kept returning to Blade. Tommy overheard snippets of conversation. "Witness saw a motorcycle matching yours. Known history with rival gangs. Insurance policy in your name." Tommy tried to speak up, to tell them about the threats, but the officers brushed him aside. "This is adult business, son." Just before dawn, they made their move. 2 officers approached Blade with handcuffs. "Blake Carson, you're under arrest for suspected arson and endangering lives." "No," Tommy shouted, pushing forward. "He saved them. He's a hero." But his protests fell on deaf ears. Marilyn arrived, pulling him away as Blade was led to a police car. "You can't see him anymore, Tommy," she said firmly, though her voice shook. "This is too dangerous." As they put Blade in the back of the patrol car, his eyes met Tommy's across the parking lot. In that moment, something passed between them, a silent understanding that this wasn't over. Tommy straightened his shoulders, nodding slightly. He wouldn't give up on Blade, just like Blade had never given up on him. The police car pulled away into the lightening dawn, leaving behind the smoking ruins of the garage and the shattered piece they'd all worked so hard to build. The air still smelled of smoke and betrayal, but underneath it was something stronger, the determination to fight for the truth, no matter the cost. The morning after the fire, Tommy dragged himself to school with heavy steps. His backpack felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, loaded down with more than just books. It carried the weight of knowing his friend sat behind bars for something he didn't do. In the hallways, whispers followed him like shadows. Kids who had briefly celebrated him now turned their backs, some making exaggerated biker gang gestures as he passed. "There goes the criminal's pet," someone sneered loud enough for him to hear. Even his teachers treated him differently. Mrs. Parker, who had once praised his improved grades, now avoided eye contact during class. When he raised his hand to answer a question, she called on someone else. At lunch, Tommy sat alone at the far end of the cafeteria. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Coming straight home after school today?" He didn't reply. They both knew he wouldn't. That evening, after dinner, Marilyn tried again to reason with him. "Honey, you need to let this go," she said, clearing the dishes. "Sometimes people we think we know, they're not who we thought they were." "You're wrong about him, Mom," Tommy said quietly. "He saved those men. Why would he burn down his own garage?" But Marilyn just shook her head, her eyes full of worry. "Please, Tommy, don't make this harder than it needs to be." Later that night, when the house grew quiet, Tommy slipped out his bedroom window. The autumn air bit through his jacket as he made his way through empty streets to the burned-out shell of the vet's garage. Yellow police tape fluttered in the breeze. The building's skeleton stood black against the night sky, still smelling of smoke and lost dreams. Tommy ducked under the tape, his flashlight beam dancing across charred walls and melted tools. Near what used to be Blade's workbench, something caught the light. Tommy knelt down, pushing aside debris until he found it, Blade's old pocket knife. The wooden handle was scorched, but the blade inside was intact. Tommy remembered how Blade would use it to strip wires or mark measurements on engine parts, always careful, always precise. Holding the knife tight, Tommy whispered into the darkness, "I'm going to fix this. I promise." The next day, he started his investigation. Between classes, he wrote down everything he remembered about that night. The sounds, the smells, the timing. After school, he visited the businesses near the garage. The convenience store owner shook his head. "Security cameras were down that week. Sorry, kid." The laundromat had nothing. The diner had closed early. But at Mike's Gas and Go, 3 blocks from the garage, Tommy found something. The night clerk, a young man named Dave, was working on his laptop when Tommy approached. "Oh yeah, I remember that night," Dave said, looking up. "Bunch of bikers came through real fast around 9:30. Wasn't Blade's crew, though? These guys had different colors. Red and black patches." Tommy's heart jumped. "Are you sure? Could you tell what gang?" "Devil's Hammer, I think. They filled up quick and tore out of here like they were running from something." Dave scratched his chin. "Come to think of it, one of them had a gas can." Tommy's hands shook as he pulled out his phone and hit record. "Could you say all that again? About what you saw?" Dave repeated his story, adding details about the motorcycles and the direction they headed. When he finished, Tommy thanked him and hurried out, hope burning bright in his chest for the first time in days. But as he rounded the corner, a motorcycle engine roared to life nearby. Tommy ducked into an alley, his heart pounding. Through the gap between buildings, he saw 3 bikes cruise past slowly, their riders wearing the same red and black patches Dave had described. Tommy pressed himself against the brick wall, barely breathing until the sound of engines faded. The knife in his pocket seemed to grow heavier. He had evidence now, real evidence that could help Blade. But he also had something else, the attention of people who wouldn't want the truth to come out. As he walked home in the gathering dusk, Tommy clutched his phone tight, the recorded conversation safely stored inside. Each step felt like progress, like moving closer to justice, even as danger circled ever nearer. Word spread fast in a small town. Tommy noticed the whispers first, people watching him from storefront windows, conversations stopping when he walked past. His evidence might help Blade, but it also painted a target on his back. The sun was setting when Tommy left Annie's diner, his stomach growling after skipping dinner. The street lamps flickered to life, casting long shadows across the empty sidewalk. He heard the footsteps before he saw them, heavy boots on concrete, coming from both directions. 2 men in leather jackets appeared, blocking his path. The taller one had a jagged scar across his chin. The other wore fingerless gloves with metal studs. "Hey there, Junior Detective," Scarchin said, his voice like gravel. "Heard you been asking questions about the garage fire." Tommy's mouth went dry. He looked around, but the street was deserted. The diner's lights were dim, the waitress busy in the back. "Smart kids know when to mind their own business," the other man said, cracking his knuckles. "You ain't being very smart." They moved closer, forcing Tommy back against a brick wall. His heart hammered so hard he could barely breathe. "Last warning," Scarchin growled. "Quit playing detective or next time we won't be so nice about it." Tommy saw his chance, a narrow gap between them. He ducked and ran, his sneakers pounding the pavement. The men shouted behind him, but Tommy knew these streets. He cut through an alley, vaulted a low fence, and kept running until his lungs burned. Pastor Dean's church stood like a beacon ahead, its windows warm with light. Tommy burst through the door, startling the old pastor who was arranging hymnals. "Tommy?" Pastor Dean's weathered face creased with concern. "What's wrong, son?" Between gasps, Tommy explained everything. The evidence, the threats, the men who cornered him. Pastor Dean listened carefully, his eyes hard with understanding that came from his own battles long ago. "Give me your phone," he said finally. Tommy handed it over, watching as the pastor copied the recording onto his computer. "I'll keep this safe and contact the police first thing tomorrow. Those men won't find it here." Tommy nodded, still shaking. "Thank you, Pastor Dean." "Blade was one of my boys once," the pastor said softly. "Before Iraq took his brother, before the anger took him. I've watched him fight his way back to the light. We won't let him lose that fight now." When Tommy got home, Marilyn was waiting. Her face was pale, her hands twisting a dish towel. "Mrs. Jensen called. She saw you running from those men." Her voice cracked. "Tommy, please, I can't lose you again, not like this." Tommy hugged her tight, feeling her tears on his shoulder. "If I stop now, he'll rot in a cell for something he didn't do," he whispered. "And I'll never forgive myself." Marilyn held him closer. "You're so much like your father," she said. "He never could walk away from someone who needed help either." The next morning, Pastor Dean's call to the police changed everything. Detectives interviewed Dave from the gas station. Security footage from nearby buildings confirmed the Devil's Hammer Gang's movements that night. By afternoon, the investigation was officially reopened. Tommy stood outside the county jail, shifting nervously from foot to foot. The metal door creaked open, and Blade stepped out, squinting in the sunlight. His leather jacket hung loose after weeks in jail, but his eyes were clear and steady. When he saw Tommy waiting, something broke in the tough biker's face. Tears spilled down his weathered cheeks as he grabbed Tommy in a fierce hug. "You didn't give up on me, kid." Blade's voice was rough with emotion. "Even when everyone else did." "That's what brothers are for," Tommy said, remembering Blade's promise outside the hospital all those months ago. They stood there for a long moment, an unlikely pair bound by something stronger than blood. The choice to see the best in each other, even when the world saw the worst. The county courthouse buzzed with tension. Every wooden bench creaked under the weight of spectators. Leather-clad bikers sat shoulder to shoulder with church ladies in floral dresses. Veterans in pressed uniforms stood along the walls, their faces grim. Camera crews jostled for position, their equipment crowding the aisles. Tommy sat in the front row, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Beside him, Marilyn touched the small gold cross at her neck, her lips moving in silent prayer. The prosecutor, a sharp-suited woman with steel-rimmed glasses, approached the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, Blade Carson is no stranger to violence. His record spans 20 years. The garage fire was just his latest act of destruction." "Objection, Your Honor," Blade's attorney called out. "Prejudicial." "Sustained," the judge replied, his voice firm. When Tommy's name was called to testify, his legs felt like lead as he walked to the stand. The courthouse fell silent except for the soft whir of cameras. He placed his hand on the Bible, took the oath, and faced the crowded room. The prosecutor's questions came fast and pointed, trying to paint Blade as a manipulator. But Tommy's voice, though it trembled with his familiar stutter, grew stronger with each answer. "Yes, I know about his past," Tommy said. "But I also know who he is now. The man who taught me to fix engines, who helped me learn to read better, who showed up at my talent show wearing a clean shirt because he didn't want to embarrass me. Then came the video evidence. The timestamp clearly showed rival gang members speeding away from the garage that night. Tommy leaned forward, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent courtroom. He didn't save me that day at the Iron Den. I saved him, because I knew there was good left in him, and I was right. A commotion erupted at the back of the courtroom. Police officers moved swiftly, surrounding a man in a leather vest, the rival gang leader whose bike had been caught on camera. The timestamps matched perfectly. They led him away in handcuffs as whispers rippled through the crowd. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. In light of this evidence, all charges against Blade Carson are dismissed. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Veterans clapped, bikers whooped, and even some of the church ladies dabbed at their eyes. As Blade stood to leave, Marilyn stepped into his path. Her face was soft with something like understanding. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for protecting my boy." Blade shook his head, his scarred hands gentle as he replied, "No, ma'am. He protected me." Spring painted the Rust Belt town in fresh colors. Cherry blossoms dotted the streets, and hope bloomed like the daffodils pushing through old concrete. The veteran's garage, once a charred skeleton, now stood proud with gleaming metal siding and wide windows that caught the morning sun. Tommy walked without his old limp now, carrying a ladder while Blade steadied it from below. Together, they hung the new sign that would change everything. Angels for Change, fixing what's broken. The letters shone in gold and chrome, a beacon for anyone needing a second chance. The opening ceremony drew crowds larger than anyone expected. Hundreds of people filled the parking lot, families with children, veterans in dress uniforms, and bikers standing respectfully beside church groups. The mayor gave a speech about community healing, but all eyes were on the unlikely trio at the center of it all. Blade Carson looked different now. His beard was neatly trimmed, and his leather vest was plain black, adorned only with a simple silver cross that caught the sunlight. The hard lines around his eyes had softened, though his gaze remained intense with purpose. "Tommy," he called out, his voice carrying across the crowd. In his hands, he held a pristine acoustic guitar, its wood gleaming like honey. "This is for you, kid." Tommy stepped forward, his eyes wide with surprise. As he took the guitar, Blade pulled him close and whispered, "You're stronger than any man I've ever known." Tommy laughed, the sound pure and clear. "Thanks, brother," he said, the word carrying all the weight of their journey together. Marilyn stood nearby, her nurse's uniform crisp beneath a light jacket, pride shining in her eyes. She watched as hundreds of motorcycles lined up for the charity ride, their first annual fundraiser for wounded veterans and anti-bullying programs. The engines roared to life in perfect unison, a thunderous chorus of purpose. Blade led the convoy, his bike gleaming in the afternoon sun. Tommy waved from the curb as they pulled away, the long line of riders stretching down the highway like a river of chrome and hope. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in amber and rose, a photographer captured one last moment. Tommy, Marilyn, and Blade standing together, their smiles genuine and free. The camera flash preserved it forever. A boy who found his courage, a mother who learned to trust, and a man the world had written off, all transformed by a love that simply refused to quit. "Sometimes," Tommy said softly, watching the last riders disappear into the sunset, "it takes the broken to show the rest of us what real strength looks like." Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.